The Coalition War College at Cassandra Station had been training officers for 210 years. Its graduation rate was 58%, the lowest of any accredited institution in Coalition space, and deliberately so. Alumni of Cassandra held command positions across 15 active fleets. A Cassandra ring, worn on the left hand in the old tradition, opened doors that rank alone did not. In 24 years of open enrollment, 9 humans had graduated. The current class had 1. The station itself was older than most of the species who trained there. It had been built during the Long Peace, expanded during the frontier skirmishes, and never once in 2 centuries had its admissions board lowered its standard to fill a class. A cadet who wore the Cassandra insignia had survived a selection process that eliminated 4 applicants out of 5 before flight training even began. The insignia meant something because so few were allowed to earn it. This was the weight the station carried into every classroom, every simulator bay, every mess hall conversation. It was not spoken about directly. It did not need to be. 210 years leaves a texture on a place, and every cadet who walked its corridors walked through that texture whether they noticed it or not. Cadet Ivan Marsh noticed it. He simply did not comment on it, because commenting on it was not part of the work in front of him. He was 19, from a colony most cadets at Cassandra had never heard of before his file crossed the admissions board. Halden's Reach was a mining settlement on the outer edge of Coalition space, 3 jumps past the last reliable relay station, the kind of place that existed on maps mostly as a fuel waypoint. His admissions officer, a Coalition lieutenant named Priya Aumont, had read his file 3 times before forwarding it, because the first 2 readings produced results that did not seem consistent with a 19-year-old applicant. The file said that Ivan Marsh had logged 140 hours of atmospheric flight time before the age of 16, on aircraft that Halden's Reach maintained itself, without Coalition oversight, because Coalition oversight did not reach that far out. The file said that during what colonial records referred to only as the 11 days, Marsh had flown search and evacuation sorties in conditions that the report described in clinical, unemotional language, the kind of language written by someone who had decided that the facts alone would carry the necessary weight. Aumont ran the verification twice. Both times it came back confirmed, cross-referenced against colonial administrative logs, medical intake records at the relief station, and satellite telemetry that Halden's Reach had, against all expectation, kept running through the worst of it. The file was real. Marsh had not mentioned any of this in his application essay. The essay was 4 paragraphs long and was mostly about wanting to fly for people who could not fly for themselves. Aumont read that too 3 times, and then approved the file without further comment, because there was nothing else that needed to be said about it. When Marsh arrived at Cassandra Station, he found his assigned quarters, unpacked a duffel bag that contained almost nothing personal, and reported to orientation on time. He did not introduce himself with a story. He shook hands, said his name, and asked where the flight simulator bay was located, because he wanted to see it before the first scheduled session. Folded into the collar of his flight jacket, small enough that most people never noticed it, was a patch from the Halden's Reach militia, 3 overlapping triangles, the colony's old evacuation symbol. He never mentioned what it was. He never took it off. The challenge came 4 weeks into the term, in the mess hall, during the kind of after-hours conversation that happened most nights among the senior cadets who had already secured their rankings and had time to spend on things other than studying. Cadet Vren Kest was a Skarn, 4th year, currently ranked 1st in the tactical simulation standings, 3rd generation of his family line to attend Cassandra. His grandmother's name was on a plaque in the strategy hall. He had never once needed to explain who he was in a room, because the room generally already knew. Vren asked the human question the way that certain cadets asked questions of the newer students from less established worlds, which is to say, with the timing and tone of someone who had prepared it in advance, waiting for an opening that would make it land as casual rather than deliberate. He waited until there was a natural pause in the conversation, until several other cadets were listening, and then he turned to Marsh with an expression of polite, unhurried curiosity. "You flew evacuation sorties," Vren said. "Before you enlisted. That's what the rumor says anyway." He let that sit for a moment. "How many enemy craft did you personally down during all that? Just curious what the number looks like from a colony that small." Several cadets smiled. It was a particular category of smile, the kind that occurs in rooms where a social hierarchy is quietly being enforced, and everyone present understands the rules of the enforcement without anyone having stated them. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of people who had already decided, comfortably and without malice, which side of a number they expected to be standing on. At the head of the table, Instructor Commander Sale Orinth, who oversaw the tactical studies track and had joined the cadets for the evening meal as he sometimes did, said nothing. He had read Marsh's file in full during the second week of term, had requested the Frontier Reserve Archive access that same week, and had been waiting, patiently, for a moment exactly like this one to arrive on its own. "That's a reasonable question," Marsh said, in the tone of someone who genuinely found it reasonable, because he did. There was no edge in it, no performance, nothing that suggested he understood the room had just been arranged around him. "Do you want the confirmed count?" he asked. "Or the estimated count? They're not the same number, and the reason they're not the same number is worth knowing before I answer." Vren blinked. This was not the shape of response he had prepared for. "Confirmed," he said, recovering quickly. "Let's start there." Marsh thought about it for a second. The way a person thinks about a number they have not had to say out loud before, not because they are uncertain of it, but because saying it changes what it is. "0, Marsh said. The smiles held. Several of them widened slightly. "I never flew a combat sortie," Marsh continued. "The 11 days weren't a combat action. They were an evacuation under fire, which is a different category of flying, and the number that matters from those 11 days isn't a kill count. It's an extraction count. 41 runs. 308 colonists moved off Halden's Reach before the relief convoy arrived, on aircraft that weren't rated for half of what we asked them to do." The mess hall did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way a wave breaks. The cadets closest to Marsh first, then the ones seated further down the table, the quiet spreading outward from the center until it had reached every ear in the room. Vren's smile did not disappear immediately. It held for a moment past the point where it stopped meaning anything, the way an expression sometimes outlasts the feeling that produced it. 41 runs, he repeated, and there was something in his voice now that was doing arithmetic it had not expected to need to do. "Under fire. The colony militia didn't have combat pilots," Marsh said. "We had whoever could fly and was willing to keep flying after the third run, when it stopped being routine and started being the thing you did anyway. I wasn't the only one. I was the youngest one who kept flying to the end." Instructor Commander Orinth set down his utensil, deliberately, the way a person sets something down when they intend the sound of it to be noticed. "Cadet Kest," he said, in the precise, neutral tone he used in every classroom, a tone that gave away nothing about what he already knew. "Would it interest you and the rest of the table to see the actual telemetry from the 11 days? I happen to have requisitioned it from the Frontier Reserve Archive some weeks ago, purely for instructional purposes." The tactical studies classroom the next morning was arranged the way it always was, tiered seating facing a central projection well, and every cadet who had been at that mess hall table found a reason to attend, even the ones not formally enrolled in the course that term. Vren sat in his usual seat, front row, the seat that came with being ranked first. He did not look uncomfortable. He looked like a person reviewing an assumption, which was worse. Orinth did not summarize the footage. He played it. The first clip was not dramatic in the way that Academy training simulations were dramatic, with their clean vector overlays and synthetic voice callouts. It was documentary footage, grainy, taken from a fixed cockpit camera on an aircraft that had clearly not been designed to survive what it was being asked to do. It showed an unmodified colonial transport, no weapon systems, running a low approach into a settlement perimeter while ground fire tracked visibly across the frame. The pilot's hands were steady on the yoke the entire time. The voice on the recording, young and flat with concentration, called out altitude and heading to a crew chief with no wasted words. "This is run 6, Orinth said. "Note the altitude. He is flying under the effective engagement ceiling of the hostile ground units, which reduces exposure time, but requires him to thread the transport through terrain most instructors here would not clear a third-year cadet to attempt in a simulator." The second clip showed a night extraction. No visible light source beyond the transport's running lamps. The pilot navigating by instrument alone through what the telemetry overlay identified as a debris field left by an earlier bombardment. "Run 14, Orinth said. He lost an engine on the return leg. He did not report it until after landing, because reporting it would have cost transit time he did not have. By the third clip, nobody in the room was smiling. The fourth clip showed the transport taking a direct hit to the outer hull during final approach. Alarms audible on the recording. And the pilot's voice did not change register at all as he continued the descent and put the aircraft down inside the extraction zone anyway. Run 22, Orinth said. He completed the run with a compromised airframe rather than abort and lose the colonists already aboard. By the fifth clip, Vren was not watching the projection well anymore. He was watching Marsh, seated 2 rows back, with the expression of someone performing a calculation that was going to take considerably longer than the remaining class period to finish. Marsh did not speak during any of it. He sat with his hands folded on the desk in front of him and watched the footage with the room. The way a person watches a memory that has become, through repetition, something closer to a fact than a feeling. His eyes did not change based on what was happening on the projection. They only changed based on what he was thinking, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. Orinth let the fifth clip run to its end, the transport touching down inside the perimeter, colonists visible on thermal boarding through the rear hatch under continued ground fire, and then he cut the feed. There are 36 more runs in the archive, Orinth said. I selected these 5 because they were the ones where the outcome was least certain. I am telling you this so that none of you mistake what you just watched for luck. The room stayed quiet a while longer after that. Nobody had assigned that silence. It simply arrived, and nobody moved to end it. Vren found Marsh after the session, in the corridor outside the classroom, and stopped a few paces short of him rather than closing the distance the way he usually did when he wanted a conversation to feel like his to control. The confirmed number and the extraction number, Vren said. They're not the same category of thing at all. I asked the wrong question. You asked a normal question, Marsh said. Most people would have asked it the same way. Vren considered that, turning it over the way a person turns over an object they are not yet certain they understand the weight of. I ranked first in tactical simulation this term, he said. I have flown 0 real hours under fire. I did not know that was a category of difference I needed to account for. He did not apologize exactly. He did not need to. He nodded once, the way a cadet nods to another cadet whose rank in some private accounting had just shifted, and walked back toward the mess hall without saying anything further. Orinth was still in the classroom when Marsh came back for his flight jacket, left folded over a chair from the morning session. The instructor was seated at the console, updating something in the term performance file, and did not look up right away. Since the second week of term, Orinth said, I have been waiting for the right discussion topic to bring that footage into a classroom. I did not think it would take a mess hall question to provide the opening, but it usually does. These things generally arrange themselves. You could have shown it the first week, Marsh said. It was not a complaint, it was closer to a question about method. I could have, Orinth agreed. It would have meant less. A number handed to a room before the room has formed an expectation about it is just a number. A number handed to a room after the room has formed the wrong expectation is an education. Marsh picked up his jacket, the small triangular patch at the collar catching the light for a moment before he pulled it on. He did not say anything else. There was nothing that needed adding to what had already been said in the classroom, by the footage, by the silence that followed it. He nodded to Orinth and walked out, headed for the simulator bay, because his session was scheduled in 20 minutes and the work did not stop for what had just happened. Orinth watched him go, then turned back to the console and opened the term performance file. Under the field for instructor remarks, he typed 3 words and closed the entry. Already commanding officers. Already commanding officers.